Okay, so far we've talked about how we can have our computer display output to us, which is nice, but we want to make programs a little more interactive. So the program that we wrote in the last video, we had very static information. We were told what the speed was, we were told what the number of hours was, and we basically just calculated the distance. But we know that that's not always going to be the case. There are going to be those times where users are going to want to supply input to us. So how does Python do that? Well, Python uses a function called input. And what we can do is we can use a function called input, and we can then put a prompt that asks the user to give us some information. So in this case, we do input. You can see that we have a prompt here. I hit enter. It puts the prompt. I type something in there, and all is good. Okay? So using the input function, we are able to ask the user to give us some information. Now the thing about this is we need to then decide what we're going to do with that information. Okay? So let's take for example. Let's say we want to prompt the user to enter in their age. Okay? So I would create a variable called age, and I'm going to set that equal to input. Let's see, please enter your age. Okay? So, I enter my age, and then if I print age, you can see it prints that value. So what I'm doing here is I am asking the user to supply me some input. I give them a prompt because I want them to be able to understand what I'm asking for. Okay? And then they enter in whatever the value is, and then we can print the value of that variable. Okay? Now, the thing about input is when we receive input, by default, it comes in as a string. Okay, so how do I know that? Well, Python has a nifty little function called type. And what I can do is in these parentheses, I can type the variable name, and you can see it tells me it's a string. Okay? So using type allows me to verify the data type of whatever I'm looking for. Now I could have done something like this, type 5 tells me it's an integer, type 5.0 tells me it's a float. So I can do those things. But what I want you to understand is that when I ask for input, it comes in as a string. Because it gets to be interesting when I do something like this, okay? X equals input. Please enter a number. Okay? So please enter a number. So I'm going to enter in 10. Y equals input. Please enter another number. Okay? I want to put in 20. Now if I do x plus y, what's going to happen? What am I going to get? Well, I'm going to get 1020. The reason why is because those come in as strings. So if your intention is to use them as something else, we want to make sure we deal with that. Okay, we want to make sure we handle that. The way we can do that is using data conversion. Okay, we can use data conversion. Meaning I can do something like this. X equals int float, or I'm sorry, int input, enter a number. Okay? Oops. For every left paren, you got to have a right one. I got 2 lefts, I need 2 rights. So I'm going to enter a number in, and if I look at the type Notice now it's an integer. What this does, okay, is it prompts me to enter a number. That's what this whole thing does, okay? Once that number comes in, it then tries to convert, and that's the key here. It tries to convert that input to an integer, okay? Let me show you what I mean by it tries. So let's say, for example, somebody says, I'm going to enter in a capital A. Well, notice we get an error, and it tells you invalid literal for int. A is not an integer, so it gives us this error. So it does try to convert it. It doesn't mean it's going to, okay? It's going to try to. And because it tries to, it may fail. In this case, it did. And we'll talk later about how we can deal with exceptions and such, but for now, we're just kind of understanding that we can do this conversion, allowing us to get different types of data. Okay? So let's take a look at our distance traveled program that we did in the last video, and let's put input in. Let's ask them some questions. So I'm going to open up my distance traveled program, and instead of doing it this way, let's prompt the user, okay? So we're going to change this up a little bit. We're going to ask them for their speed. We're going to ask them for their time, and then we're going to do the calculations. So the distance, we're going to make this a float, and we're going to say enter well, better yet, we're going to leave distance as 0.0, okay? The speed we're going to make float, and we're going to do input, enter your speed in miles per hour, okay? So we're going to prompt the user to give us their speed in miles per hour, and then we're going to prompt the user to enter the number of hours traveled. Okay, so I know that's probably not very good English, but I want to prompt them and see if we can get the number of hours. And then what we're going to do is then we're going to do our calculation. So distance is equal to speed times time. And then we're going to print the distance traveled is, and then we will put our closing quote and put distance as the variable. So what we're going to do here is we declared a variable called distance. We set equal to 0 because we want to find out what that is. Our speed, we're going to prompt the user to enter their speed. We're then going to prompt the user for the time, and then we're going to tell them what their distance traveled is. And we're going to say distance traveled is distance, and then we'll make sure we put miles in there. Okay? Go ahead and pause the video, take a moment to get that typed in, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. Okay, so that you got typed in, again, what do we have? We have 3 variables, distance, speed, and time. Again, because that's the formula we're going to calculate with. So the distance is what we're trying to find. So I just declared that as 0.0. I want it to be a float because I might go 13.65 miles or something, okay? Speed, I put it as a float because I could go 65.5 miles per hour, I guess. And I'm going to prompt them for their speed. So again, it's going to prompt them. It's going to try to convert that to a float. If that's successful, it's going to store that value as speed. We do the same thing for time. It's going to prompt them for the number of hours. It's going to try to convert that to a float. And if successful, it's going to store that as time. We then do our calculation. Distance is equal to speed times time. And then we're going to print out the distance traveled is the number of miles. So go ahead and run this. It's going to ask me to save it, and that's fine. We go OK. And here we go. So down here at the very bottom, you're going to see it says, enter your speed in miles per hour. So we're going 85 miles per hour. How long do we go at 85 mile an hour? We went for 1.25 hours. So 1.25 hours is how long we traveled. So that means we traveled a distance of 106.25 miles. Okay? So you can see how we were able to prompt the user for some data. We want them to provide us with something. This is something very typical. You know, we are going to ask users to provide us with information, and we're going to do the calculations based on that. Okay? So we introduced a couple things in here. One, we introduced input that allows us to prompt the user for data. We realized we can convert the data into different data types because by default, when we do input, it comes in as a string. So we're converting that to some other data type. Okay? And then the last thing we're going to do is we do a little bit of math in there. Okay? Where in our program, we did our mathematical equation and then we printed out what the distance is. Okay? Hopefully that was helpful, kind of seeing how we can then prompt the user for input. It's really kind of a neat thing you can do, and this is something very typical. You're going to prompt users for input. You're not going to necessarily have static data all the time. You're going to have some dynamic data you may need to deal with. Okay? All right, if you have questions, as always, feel free to contact me. If not, I bid you good morning, good afternoon, good evening.